Hey, thanks for joining me this morning. I want to welcome you to our weekly devotional. These release every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. And I just want to remind you that the whole purpose of doing these videos is actually so that you can read and apply scripture yourself. And so hopefully, after watching several of these videos, you'll be able to do that on your own. You don't need to watch these videos anymore. So today we're going to look at Proverbs chapter 26, and then we're going to illustrate a few principles of interpreting Proverbs. Believe it or not, there's still a couple we haven't gotten to. And so let's go ahead now and look at Proverbs chapter 26. We'll start in verses 4 and 5. It says, "Don't answer the foolish argument of fools, or you will become as foolish as they are." And then immediately following that, "Be sure to answer the foolish argument of fools, or they will become wise in their own estimation." And so I'm going to pause right there for a moment because there's a tension there. These two proverbs really say, they say something opposite, right, one after another. And so when we read these, it's a good idea here to remember that Proverbs are to be used at a particular time and in a particular way. Many of them are not, this is true in every single possible situation, always, forevermore. And this actually illustrates what I'm saying, because these two things cannot both be true forever at the same time. They are the wise thing to do, following God's instruction in a given circumstance. So there is a circumstance in which, verse 4, you should not answer fools, or you'll be as foolish as they are. In other words, sometimes there is a argument or discussion, I find these a lot online, where it's just a bad idea to even get into it because you're going to get dragged into a ridiculous argument. I can probably illustrate this point best by my kids, who are, my oldest is 5 years older than my youngest, actually 5.5 years. And so I can remember the older one having gotten to a place where logic and thinking were starting to develop, and the younger one was still in the silly phase, right? And so the older one would try to make a point and argue their case, and the younger one would say something ridiculous on purpose. And so, there are going to be times when it's absurd to try and argue with someone. They're not going to listen anyway. And so those are the kinds of arguments we want to stay out of. However, there are going to be times when, as verse 5 tells us, we need to get into the argument. Verse 5 says, "Be sure to answer the foolish arguments of fools, or they will become wise in their own estimation." And so there are circumstances in which people will, maybe say something like, nobody can prove me wrong, so I must be right. And they're becoming puffed up and wise in their own eyes is another biblical way of saying that. Those are the kinds of things that we should correct. But even when we do correct those things, we should be careful to not get drawn into a foolish argument. We should make our plain, reasonable assertion according to the laws of God, and then be willing to step away and not get into a foolish argument. So that is the first section of chapter 26 that I want to look at today. The next section can be found in verse number 10. We'll look at verses 10 and 11. These still have to do with the idea of how you interact with foolish people. So verse 10 says, "An employer who hires a fool or a bystander is like an archer who shoots at random." You don't want to be that person, do you? And then, "As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness." And so these are still dealing with that theme of a fool. And so in some of these cases, and especially in this chapter, Proverbs is dealing with a theme, a whole theme for multiple Proverbs. And so it's giving us information, instruction is really a better word, about how to deal with a certain kind of thing at length. And so the collector of the Proverbs, Solomon, has arranged these in a way that give you a more holistic instruction for a circumstance. And so just like we don't want to get drawn into foolish arguments, here in verse 10, we want to be careful that we vet the people that we hire. We want to do that so that we aren't causing more problems. We aren't, like an archer who shoots at random. I have vividly can remember my parents driving home from something and pulling up into their yard, and they told me there were like 6 police cars there. The guy who they had hired to do their yard had hired someone who was a day laborer for that day. Particular person was skipping out on on their ankle monitor. And so they were able to track this person down. I don't exactly understand how, but anyway, they tracked the guy down. And so all these police cars were in my parents' yard. I tell you that because sometimes when we don't deal properly with foolish people or a bystander, we're going to cause more trouble than we think whatever problem we think we're solving. And then the final thing there, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness. And that one is a graphic picture, but it illustrates the point that foolish people never learn from their mistakes. That's what makes them foolish, because a wise person is going to learn from their mistakes. And so we want to not only have care when we deal with other people, not to first of all, to discern if they're a fool or not. The way that we would know that is if they're learning from mistakes. We would want to do that in the people that we hire, and we would want to know this about the kinds of arguments that they make. And so this entire proverb works together for giving us instruction about how to deal with people who are, in terms of Proverbs, not following God. Because that's what a fool ultimately is, someone who doesn't follow God's instruction. And so I hope that that's been helpful for you today, and I hope that you will be as captivated by Proverbs as I have been, and continue to study those. I'd love to talk to you more about that. You can email me, justin@greenwood.church, or you can come find me over at the information desk in between our worship services.